Hello dear friends, today I will tell you about technological breakthroughs and the emergence of Japan as one of the most developed countries. After World War II had ended, the surrendered Japan was devastated. All the large cities, industries, and transportation networks were severely damaged. A severe shortage of food continued for several years. Allied forces led by the United States occupied the nation and started the rehabilitation of the Japanese state. Between 1945 and 1952, the U.S. occupying forces, led by General Douglas A. MacArthur, enacted widespread military, political, economic, and social reforms. The occupation, like the Taika reform of the 7th century and the Meiji Restoration 80 years earlier, represented a period of rapid social and institutional change that was based on the borrowing and incorporation of foreign models. General principles for the proposed governance of Japan had been spelled out in the Potsdam Declaration and elucidated in U.S. government policy statements drawn up and forwarded to MacArthur in August 1945. The essence of these policies was simple and straightforward: the demilitarization of Japan, so that it would not again become a danger to peace; democratization, meaning that, while no particular form of government would be forced upon the Japanese, efforts would be made to develop a political system under which individual rights would be guaranteed and protected, and the establishment of an economy that could adequately support a peaceful and democratic Japan. The armed forces were demobilized and millions of Japanese troops and civilians abroad were repatriated. The empire was disbanded. State Shinto was disestablished. Nationalist organizations were abolished and their members were removed from important posts. Japan's armament industries were dismantled. In the economic field, the Allies introduced land reform, designed to benefit the majority tenant farmers and reduce the power of rich landowners, many of whom had advocated for war and supported Japanese expansionism in the 1930s. MacArthur also tried to break up the large Japanese business conglomerates, or zaibatsu, as part of the effort to transform the economy into a free market capitalist system. The cooperation between the Japanese and the Allied powers worked relatively smoothly. Critics started to grow when the United States acted increasingly according to its self-interest in the Cold War. We introduced the persecution of communists, stationed more troops in Japan, and wanted Japan to establish its own self-defense force despite the anti-war article in the Constitution. Many aspects of the occupation's so-called reverse course were welcomed by conservative Japanese politicians. With the peace treaty that went into effect in 1952, the occupation ended. Japan's self-defense force was established in 1954, accompanied by large public demonstrations. From 1952 to 1973, Japan experienced accelerated economic growth and social change. By 1952, Japan had, at last, regained its pre-war industrial output. Thereafter, the economy expanded at unprecedented rates. At the same time, economic development and industrialization supported the emergence of a mass consumer society. Large numbers of Japanese who had previously resided in villages became urbanized. Tokyo, whose population stood at about 3 million in 1945, reached some 9 million by 1970. In the early 1990s, the previously rapid growth of the country's economy slowed down sharply. The end of the 1980s was marked by a massive wave of speculation from Japanese companies, banks, and securities. The combination of exceptionally high land values and exceptionally low interest rates resulted in a short-term situation where credit was very cheap and readily available. This led to massive borrowing, the proceeds of which were invested mainly in domestic and foreign stocks and securities. Recognizing the instability of the financial bubble, the Treasury raised interest rates sharply in late 1989. The bubble burst, causing a massive crash in the stock market and triggering a debt crisis, which in turn led to a crisis in the banking sector. Eventually, a wave of consolidation set in, leaving only 4 national banks in Japan. The situation is critical for the long-term economic outlook, as Japanese firms were saddled with huge debts, which affected their ability to invest. It also meant that it became very difficult to get a loan, and even now the official interest rate is 0.1%. Many borrowers turned to usurers to obtain a loan. This led to a phenomenon known as the lost decade, when Japan's economic growth came to a complete halt in the 1990s. Unemployment grew at a significant pace, but then it decreased. Japan has traditionally low unemployment rates, and due to the demographic crisis, the demographic aging of the population, and strict immigration policies in Japan, the deficit of able-bodied population is rapidly growing. Despite the recovery of the economy in the 2000s, the conspicuous consumption of the 1980s, such as spending on whiskey and cars, has not yet fully returned. This was due to the traditional Japanese emphasis on frugality in economy, as well as the fierce competition that Japanese firms, such as Sony and Toyota, that dominated the 1980s experience from companies in South Korea and Taiwan. Most Japanese companies started to replace the permanent labor force with temporary workers who had no job security. These employees now make up over a third of Japan's workforce. Orientalist Vsevolod Ovchinnikov, in his interview, 2004, mentions the ongoing complex process of erosion of the system of lifetime employment, the practice of lifetime employment adopted in Japan, which has come into conflict with the modern economic system. Thank you for watching. If you liked it, like it so that I would be motivated to look for more rare photos from the past. You can also look at other interesting videos on my channel.